Angelina May Whitlock stood on the platform with her back straight, her chin held high, though her fingers trembled as they rested on the shoulders of the children gathered around her skirts. She was 28 years old, though the lines of grief and toil had etched themselves early upon her face. Her beauty had not been erased. Far from it, it glowed all the clearer for the bruising life had dealt her, like a rose struggling through stone. Her hair, the color of dark chestnut, was bound with a faded ribbon that once might have been blue. Her dress was worn thin, hem frayed, but clean. She had washed it the night before, determined that if she must face humiliation, she would at least stand in dignity. Her 6 children clung to her with eyes wide and hollow. Eli, the eldest at 12, held baby Ruth in his arms, his jaw set too tightly for a boy. Sam, 10, kept glancing at the crowd, his hand twitching as though he longed to throw a stone at the mocking faces. Luke, 9, tried to be brave but pressed himself against his mother's side, trembling with each shout from the auctioneer. Anna, 7, kept whispering to herself, reciting scraps of the psalms her mother had taught her, a shield of words. Josie, 5, buried her face in Angelina's skirt, shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. And Ruth, barely 2, whimpered faintly in her brother's arms, unaware of the cruelty circling around them. The one who had placed them here leaned against the post with a smirk carved into his face. Virgil Whitlock, Angelina's brother-in-law, wore the smugness of a man who believed the law was on his side. His wife Nettie stood beside him, arms crossed, her lips twisted in satisfaction. They had never hidden their disdain for Angelina, mocking her as too proud, too fine, too much trouble for their family. And when her husband died, taken by fever in the winter, they had wasted no time in casting her and the children out, only to haul them back when they realized they might fetch coin. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip, calling out numbers, waiting for hands to rise. At first the offers were cruelly low, no more than the price of a single mare. Laughter rolled through the crowd, thick and heavy, the sound of men who enjoyed another's shame. Angelina's face flushed, but she did not bow her head. She gathered her children closer, whispering soft reassurances they could barely hear over the roar of voices. Women in the crowd looked away, ashamed but silent. A few children tugged at their mother's skirts, asking why that lady and her little ones were standing there, but no answer came. The cruelty of it was a spectacle that could not be spoken, only endured. Eli's jaw quivered as he tried to lift Ruth higher, and Angelina steadied him with a touch. She wished she could shield them all with her body, draw them inside herself where the world could not wound them. But she had only her strength, her voice, her dignity, and she would not let those be stripped away. Virgil barked out to the auctioneer, reminding him to get on with it, to squeeze every penny from this burden. Nettie chuckled, her laughter like glass breaking. Angelina's cheeks burned, but she forced her eyes forward, fixing them on the horizon beyond the crowd, as if she could see past the dust and the jeering into some gentler world. The bidding dragged. Some men looked tempted, not for kindness, but for labor, for cheap hands to mend their fields, scrub their floors. Others sneered, asking who would want so many mouths to feed. Each comment pressed like a stone against Angelina's chest. Then, through the murmuring and the laughter, the sound of boots against earth drew notice. A man stepped out from the edge of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing most of his face. Jonas Hale was known to the town, though not well. A solitary rancher, 34 years of age, he lived miles out beyond the Willow Creek, where his spread of land touched the foothills. Since the death of his wife and newborn nearly a decade past, he had spoken little, kept to himself, and carried about him a quiet air of grief that discouraged company. Folks called him decent but distant, a man who carried his solitude like armor. Jonas's gaze swept the platform, resting not on Angelina's beauty, nor on the spectacle of the children, but on the trembling hands, the way Eli struggled to hold the baby, the way Angelina's back remained unbent though all eyes tried to break her. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer. The auctioneer, sensing a serious bidder at last, raised his voice with sudden cheer. Numbers flew higher, though most had already grown tired of the sport. Jonas lifted his hand once, steady, deliberate. A hush fell. The amount he offered was no small sum. It silenced the laughter and made Virgil stiffen with surprise. Another man muttered a half-hearted bid, but Jonas countered without a flicker of hesitation. His voice was calm, almost flat, yet it carried a weight that made others fall back. The crowd stirred, whispers passing. Why would Jonas Hale, of all men, throw his silver at such a burden? Virgil stepped forward, spitting anger, but the auctioneer banged his gavel, sealing the deal. Jonas had bought not just Angelina May, not just one child, but the whole family of 7. A gasp rippled through the yard. Women stared. Men scratched their beards, puzzled, amused, or irritated. Nettie let out a shriek of protest, but it was swallowed by the noise of the gavel's final thud. Angelina stood frozen. Relief, fear, and disbelief tangled within her chest. She had been bought, saved, perhaps, or bound in a different way. She dared not hope yet, dared not trust. Her children clung tighter, wide eyes darting between the tall stranger and the jeering in-laws. Jonas climbed the platform with quiet steps. He did not look at Virgil, nor Nettie, nor the crowd. His eyes met Angelina's for a breath, steady and unreadable. Without a word, he reached for the reins of the wagon waiting nearby. Angelina guided her children down the steps, her movements dignified, though her heart thundered. Eli still carried Ruth, Sam helped Josie, Luke clutched Anna's hand. They climbed into the wagon, their small bodies pressed close, their breaths quick. Angelina followed, her fingers trembling as she settled them around her. Jonas took the reins, the lines creaking in his hands. The horses shifted, impatient. For a moment, the yard was still, all eyes fixed on the sight. A solitary cowboy driving away with a woman and 6 children he had no tie to. As the wheels rolled forward, Virgil shouted after them, his voice sharp with rage. Nettie spat curses. But neither Angelina nor Jonas looked back. The spring breeze caught Angelina's hair, lifting the faded ribbon, and she felt the sting of tears she had held back too long. The town whispered, as towns always do. Some said Jonas had lost his wits. Some said he had taken pity, others that he had taken possession. But no one could deny the strangeness, nor the quiet weight of the moment. Angelina held her children close as the wagon rumbled over the ruts, the sound of the auctioneer's gavel still echoing in her ears. She dared not speak. Jonas sat tall, his profile carved against the light, a man of silence and mystery. The horizon stretched wide, the fields greening with spring, the sky pale with promise and uncertainty. Angelina's heart ached with questions she could not voice. What did this man want of her? What kind of life waited at the end of this road? Would kindness or another cruelty meet her there? Jonas flicked the reins lightly, urging the horses onward. The wagon creaked, the children huddled, and Angelina lifted her face toward the horizon, where the light of the fading sun burned gold against the clouds. She whispered a prayer no one heard, not even her children. And as the town fell behind them, as the cruel laughter dwindled into memory, one truth pressed upon her heart. The life she had known was gone forever, and whatever waited ahead with this lonely cowboy would change not only her fate, but perhaps the tale of the whole West. The wagon wheels creaked as they left the town behind, the sound of iron against ruts giving rhythm to the silence that lay heavy between them. Angelina held Ruth close while Eli steadied the younger ones, his boyish shoulders squared as if he could bear the weight of his mother's dignity and all the fear of his siblings at once. Jonas sat tall at the reins, hat brim low, his profile cut sharp against the spring horizon. He did not look at her, nor speak, and in that silence Angelina's heart thudded with 1,000 questions. She was bound again, not by law or cruel kin, but by the unknown nature of this quiet man who had bought her family whole. The land stretched out wide as the wagon rolled on, fields greening after the long winter, creek beds swelling with the melt of snow from far-off hills. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the cool breeze. The air was thick with the scent of new grass, mud, and the faint sweetness of blossoms just beginning to stir. Angelina breathed it in, steadying herself. This was not a prison yard. The air did not smell of cruelty. Yet the memory of the auction still stung like a lash across her back. The children were restless. Josie whimpered now and then, asking in her small voice where they were going, whether this man would keep them safe. Angelina hushed her, though she had no answer. Luke leaned against her, his face pale, eyes darting toward Jonas as though afraid he might turn and bark some harsh command. Sam fidgeted, muttering he could work, he could chop wood or herd cattle, that they would not be a burden if the man feared such things. Anna whispered prayers into the folds of Angelina's dress, clinging to her mother's side. At last, as the wagon crested a rise, Jonas spoke. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but steady. "We'll be at my place by sundown." Angelina glanced at him, startled by the sound, and nodded once though he did not look at her. The words were not a promise, not quite comfort, yet something in the tone eased the air. It was direction, a destination, not a vague threat of being cast adrift. The road wound into the valley where willow trees bent low over a silver stream. Beyond, tucked against a gentle slope, stood the cabin. Its timbers were darkened with age, its roof patched in places, but smoke curled faintly from the chimney and fields stretched green on either side. A barn leaned sturdy to the west, fences tracing the edges of pasture. Chickens scurried near the coop, and a dog barked once, then fell quiet as if recognizing its master's return. The children stared, wide-eyed. They had never known such open land, nor a home that stood apart, sovereign. Angelina felt her breath hitch, for though plain, the cabin radiated something she had not known in years, solitude without menace. Jonas halted the wagon. He climbed down, boots thudding against earth, and without waiting he reached to lift Josie down. She flinched, clutching Angelina's skirt, but his hand was gentle, steady. He set her on the ground, then held his arms for Ruth. Eli hesitated, but when Jonas's gaze met his, calm and unwavering, the boy slowly passed the baby down. Jonas cradled the child as though she were glass, then passed her into Angelina's waiting arms. He did not speak, but his silence was not unkind. Inside, the cabin was simple but solid. A hearth built of river stone dominated one wall, a table of oak stood in the center with mismatched chairs, and a narrow staircase led to a loft above. The air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and faintly of dried herbs. There were blankets folded neatly on a chest, shelves lined with jars of beans and corn, and a worn Bible resting on a side table. It was a house built for quiet living, not for show. The children explored with cautious steps, their hands brushing the furniture as though to test if it was real. Eli carried Ruth near the hearth, rocking her gently. Sam tapped the chair leg, marveling at its strength. Anna found a tin cup and turned it over in her hands as if it were treasure. Jonas set a kettle on the hook above the fire without a word, pouring water from a bucket near the door. Angelina stood near the table, unsure. Was she guest, servant, possession? She folded her arms to hide the trembling in her hands. Finally, Jonas spoke again, his back still turned. "There's food here. You and the little ones eat first." Angelina's throat tightened. She had braced for command, for expectation of labor, but instead there was this quiet provision. She nodded though he did not see it, and moved to gather bowls. The children sat crowded at the table, their eyes flicking toward Jonas now and then, uncertain. Angelina ladled stew, each spoonful measured though she longed to heap it high. They ate greedily, and when their bellies filled, their faces softened, as if years had fallen away. Jonas waited until they had finished before taking a bowl himself. He ate at the hearth, not intruding on their cluster at the table. The silence stretched, but it was different now, not sharp with cruelty, but awkward tentative, like soil waiting for seed. Night settled, the spring air turning cool. Jonas fetched quilts from the chest, laying them out on the loft floor. "Children can sleep up here. You can take the bed," he said simply to Angelina, gesturing toward the small room on the main floor. Angelina's lips parted in surprise. "And you?" "I'll take the chair." He did not elaborate, did not meet her eyes. He simply lit the lantern lower and turned toward the hearth. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words caught. Gratitude had so often been twisted into debt, into chains. Instead she tucked her children beneath the quilts, brushing kisses across their brows, listening as their breathing slowed. In the quiet hours, when only the crackle of the fire broke the silence, Angelina lay awake in the small bed, staring at the beams above. This man, Jonas Hale, had bought her family at the block where dignity was stripped, yet here he gave them space, food, rest, without claim. It unsettled her, this absence of cruelty. She did not know how to rest inside it. Days unfurled like that first night. Jonas rose before dawn, tending cattle, mending fences. Angelina awoke to the sound of his boots on the porch, the smell of coffee brewing. She took to the chores without waiting to be asked, washing clothes in the stream, sweeping the floor, cooking meals. Her hands ached, her body bent, but she moved with a quiet pride, unwilling to be a weight upon his household. The children adapted slowly. Eli followed Jonas at a distance, studying how he worked the land. Sam begged to help, and Jonas handed him small tasks, carrying water, holding nails. Luke lingered near the barn, petting the dog when he thought no one saw. Anna collected wildflowers from the meadow, placing them in tin cups around the cabin. Josie laughed once when the chickens pecked at her skirt, and the sound startled everyone with its sudden brightness. Ruth toddled after Angelina, but sometimes wandered to Jonas, reaching stubby hands for his boots. Jonas never spoke much, yet his actions carried weight. He mended a chair that wobbled under Anna, fixed Angelina's worn shoe sole with leather scraps, chopped extra wood without being asked. He moved quietly around them, like a man unsure if he was welcome in his own house. Angelina noticed. She noticed the way his eyes softened when Ruth clung to him, the way his hands steadied Eli without words, the way he never laughed at the children's mistakes. She noticed, too, his silence, heavy, deliberate, as though words cost more than silver. At night, Angelina hummed lullabies to soothe the children. Jonas sat near the hearth, head bowed, listening without turning. The sound of her voice seemed to loosen something in the air, filling the cabin with warmth no fire could give. Still, doubt gnawed at Angelina. Was she merely spared for now, a temporary guest until Jonas tired of their noise? Did he expect repayment, or worse, obedience without question? Shame whispered from the past, reminding her of how easily kindness turned to cruelty. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the meadow, Angelina stepped onto the porch. Jonas sat in his chair, whittling a piece of wood, his profile etched against the light. She hesitated, then spoke. "You didn't have to bring us here." Jonas's knife paused, his gaze fixed on the carving. "Didn't sit right. What they did." His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the breeze. House was too empty anyway. Angelina's breath caught. The words were plain, but they carried something heavier, a truth he would not dress in poetry. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just solitude but sorrow carved deep. The children's laughter floated from inside, light and fragile. Jonas set down the carving, stared at the horizon. His silence pressed between them, yet it was no longer void. It was a bridge, fragile, waiting. That night, as Angelina tucked the children into the loft, she lingered, listening to their even breaths. She stepped to the doorway and glanced toward the hearth. Jonas was there, his head bowed, his lips moving faintly in prayer, or perhaps only in thought. The fire cast his face in shifting light, half shadow, half flame. Angelina's chest ached with something she could not name. It was not yet trust, not yet love, but it was the stirring of safety, of soil softening after frost. And when she returned to the bed, pulling the quilt to her chin, a thought she dared not speak pressed against her heart. Perhaps the lonely cowboy had not only saved them from the block, but might, in time, save them from silence itself. Spring spread itself wide across the valley, painting the pastures with green and lacing the air with the scent of wildflowers. Days grew longer, softer, as though the land itself was sighing after a hard winter. In that unfolding season, the cabin changed. It was no longer a hollow shell echoing with one man's solitude, but a vessel filling, quietly, with the weight of laughter, whispers, and the small stirrings of life. The children settled first. Their fear did not vanish all at once, but little by little, as though the house taught them new rhythms. Eli followed Jonas into the fields, his young body taut with the need to prove his worth. He rose early, often before dawn, shadowing the cowboy with steps longer than his legs could bear. Sam begged to help, and Jonas gave him small tasks, carrying nails, holding boards steady. Luke watched the barn with hungry eyes, sneaking inside to pat the horse's flank or linger by the stalls. Anna scattered flowers across the table, lining tin cups with violets and daisies, declaring each one made the cabin smile. Josie found courage in the company of chickens, laughing when their feathers brushed her arms. And Ruth, the baby, toddled unsteady toward Jonas whenever he returned, clapping her hands until he bent and let her touch his beard with sticky fingers. Angelina moved through the days with steady grace. She cooked, mended, washed, worked the soil with hands that blistered but did not falter. She was not idle, not a guest, but neither did Jonas treat her as servant. Instead, they orbited each other in silence, two wary souls learning the map of each other's presence. Yet the town had not forgotten. Whispers trailed Angelina whenever she entered the mercantile for flour or cloth. "Bought at auction," some hissed. "Pity case," others muttered. Nettie's sharp tongue cut deepest, loud enough for all to hear. Strutting now, but she was on the block like cattle. Angelina bore it with her head high, though inside her chest burned. She wished Jonas would speak, would answer those cruel voices, but he only gathered the sacks in silence, leading her and the children out without a word. His refusal to defend her wounded and baffled her, though part of her wondered if silence was his way of shielding her from worse. One evening, after such a day, Angelina sat on the porch with weary bones. The sky blazed crimson, the air humming with crickets. She rubbed her palms, raw from work, and thought of the jeers, of Virgil's smirk. Doubt coiled tight within her. She feared Jonas had bought them only from duty, that pity was all she was worth. Jonas came to sit beside her, setting down the tool he had been oiling. He did not speak for a long while, only watched the horizon where the last light bled away. Finally he said, "What they think in town don't matter much out here." Angelina's throat tightened. She wanted to believe it, but she had lived too long under judgment to shrug it off. "It matters when they look at the children like they're a burden," she whispered. Jonas turned his gaze toward her then, steady, unreadable. "Burden's mine, not theirs." His tone carried no poetry, only truth. Yet it lodged deep in Angelina's chest, a weight and a balm at once. The children's laughter spilled through the doorway behind them, the sound of play. For the first time since the auction, Angelina allowed herself a small smile, brief but real. As spring ripened, small gestures began to bloom between them, delicate as petals unfolding. Jonas left a pair of mended shoes by her door without a word. Angelina set aside the best portion of stew in his bowl, though he always claimed the children should eat more. Jonas lifted the baby into the saddle one morning, guiding the horse slowly while Ruth squealed with delight. Angelina watched from the fence, her heart aching at the sight of this quiet man letting the smallest child rest against his chest. Yet fear still lingered. One night, when the moon rose pale and silver, Angelina packed what little she could, her ribbon, a small shawl, the tin cup Anna had claimed as treasure. She meant to slip away before dawn, fearing kindness could never last. But as she stepped to the door, bundle clutched, Jonas's voice came from the shadows. "This house needs your laughter." She froze, the words cutting through her resolve. He did not beg, did not accuse. He only spoke as though stating a truth as solid as the beams above them. Slowly, trembling, she set the bundle down. She returned to the bed, unable to sleep, his words echoing like a vow unspoken. Days grew warmer. Fields brightened with wheat shoots. Angelina began to hum as she worked, the children following her song. Jonas listened, though he never joined. Once, he passed by the doorway as she sang to Ruth and paused, his shadow long across the floor. He did not step inside, but Angelina knew he lingered. Trust, fragile and hesitant, began to grow. When Angelina stumbled while carrying water, Jonas caught her arm before she fell. Their eyes met, and in that instant, silence shifted between them, not empty now, but filled with recognition. Neither spoke, but both knew something had stirred. Still, the shadow of shame clung. Angelina could not forget the block, the cruel eyes, the weight of being sold. At times, she wondered if Jonas saw her as possession. At times, she feared he might one day send them away. Yet each act of quiet care contradicted those fears, until she lived suspended between doubt and hope. The children sensed it too. They began to look at Jonas not as rescuer but as anchor. Eli sought his approval, Sam craved his instruction, Luke followed his steps. Anna wove flowers into Angelina's hair one afternoon, and Jonas, passing by, paused to look. His lips twitched into the faintest smile, the first she had seen. It was brief, but it stayed with her, a glimmer in the dimness. Then came the storm. It rolled in swift from the west, sky blackened, wind shrieking through the trees. The air grew heavy, pressing, as though the land itself held its breath. Jonas rushed to the barn, securing doors, while Angelina gathered the children close. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, startling the little ones into tears. Rain hammered the roof, leaking through cracks. Jonas returned, soaked, hair plastered to his brow. "We'll stay in the barn," he said. "Stronger there." Angelina nodded, gathering quilts, ushering the children through sheets of rain. Inside the barn, lantern light flickered against the beams. They huddled in the hay, the animals restless around them. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling so near it shook the rafters. The children clung to their mother, to Jonas, to one another. Angelina held Ruth tight, whispering prayers, while Jonas stood guard, broad shoulders braced as though he could shield them all. For the first time, Angelina reached for his hand. His calloused palm closed around hers, firm, steady, and in the storm's chaos she felt something she had not known in years: safety. They did not speak, but their eyes met in the lantern glow. It was not pity, not duty. It was recognition, raw and unguarded. A storm raged outside, but within, something gentler broke free. The night dragged long, rain battering, thunder roaring, but inside the barn a strange peace held. The children drifted to sleep one by one, exhaustion outweighing fear. Angelina leaned against Jonas's shoulder at last, too weary to sit upright. He did not move away. He let her rest. His breathing was steady, slow, like the beat of a drum guiding her heart back from fear. When dawn broke, pale and trembling, the storm had passed. The land outside lay washed clean, fields glittering with dew, air sharp with renewal. Angelina stepped from the barn with Jonas beside her, the children tumbling behind. The sky stretched wide, clear, as if the storm had carried away more than clouds. Angelina felt different. The fear that had clung to her since the auction had loosened. Something had shifted in Jonas too. His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer the guarded eyes of a man keeping his distance. They were the eyes of someone who had stood inside the storm with her and chosen to remain. That evening, when the sun sank gold over the meadow, Angelina watched her children chase each other in the grass, their laughter rising like larks. She turned to Jonas, words trembling on her tongue. But before she could speak, he looked at her, and the faintest smile touched his lips again. The moment was small, unspoken, but it was enough. Angelina felt her heart swell with something perilous and precious: hope. Yet as the days after the storm settled into new rhythms, Angelina knew the world would not let them rest long. Virgil's shadow still lingered, and the town's judgment had not died with the thunder. Safety here was fragile, easily broken. And though Jonas had given her and her children a place, she knew the test of belonging was still to come. When she lay down that night, the cabin warm with children's breathing and the faint creak of the rocking chair where Jonas sat awake, Angelina closed her eyes with one thought pressing against her soul. The storm had bound them, but storms always return. The weeks after the storm unfurled with deceptive calm, like a river flowing gentle though rocks lurked beneath the surface. The cabin pulsed with life, laughter spilling into the fields, Angelina's humming floating through the rooms, the children chasing chickens or following Jonas in the pasture. The ache of silence had lessened. Yet Jonas felt it. The tension that had not dissolved, only settled like dust waiting to be stirred. Angelina felt it too, each time she went to town and caught the sideways looks, the muttered words that clung like burrs to her skirts. The world beyond their meadow had not forgotten the auction. Nor had Virgil. It came on a bright afternoon when the air was sweet with lilacs and the creek glimmered like silver. Angelina was hanging laundry on the line, sunlight catching her hair, when a wagon rattled down the road and stopped at the gate. The children froze where they played, Anna's bouquet of flowers dropping to the dirt. Jonas stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands, his body stiffening as his eyes fell upon the figures. Virgil sat at the reins, smugness smeared across his face. Nettie beside him, her mouth sharp as a blade. And behind them, two lawmen dismounted, dust rising around their boots. Virgil swung down, swaggering. "I've come for what's mine," he announced loud enough for the children to hear. His voice dripped with false righteousness. "That woman and her brats. Blood law says they belong to the Whitlocks." Nettie's laugh followed, brittle, cruel. Angelina's breath caught, the cloth slipping from her hands. She gathered the children instinctively, pulling them close, her body a shield. The humiliation of the block returned in a rush, the memory of gavel and jeers pressing against her chest. She whispered prayers, her heart pounding. Jonas stepped forward, his shadow long across the yard. He did not raise his voice, but his words carried like stone thrown in still water. "They don't belong to you." Virgil sneered. "You paid coin, sure, but they're family. Blood binds tighter than silver. Hand them over and we'll forget your little stunt at the auction." The lawmen shifted, uneasy. One cleared his throat. "The man's not wrong, Hale. The law favors kin, unless she herself says different." His gaze flicked toward Angelina, as though inviting her to fold beneath pressure. Angelina's mouth went dry. She wanted to speak, to cry out that she would never return, but fear gripped her, memories of nights under Virgil's roof where cruelty disguised itself as duty. Her voice faltered, her children pressing into her skirts. Jonas's jaw tightened. "Blood may bind," he said slowly, his eyes locked on Virgil, "but cruelty cuts deeper. I bought them, yes. But I'd give my life before I hand them back to you." The yard went still. Even the birds seemed to hush. Angelina's eyes widened, tears burning. The children stared at Jonas, their small mouths parted. He had spoken not in pity, not in distance, but with a fire she had never seen before. Virgil's face darkened. He stepped closer, fists curling. Nettie hissed like a snake. "You think yourself noble, but you've taken on a burden that'll break you. You'll beg us to take them back before winter." Jonas moved no closer, but his voice sharpened, steel under quiet. "Then I'll break with them. Better that than let them rot under your roof." The lawmen exchanged looks, shifting uncomfortably. One spoke at last. "Lady, is it your will to stay with this man?" Angelina's throat trembled, her body quaking with fear and memory. She looked at Jonas, his steady gaze, the line of his shoulders, the children clustered near his boots. She thought of the night he had said, "This house needs your laughter." She thought of the storm, of his hand closing around hers, of the safety she had not dared to name. Her breath steadied. She stepped forward, her hand slipping into Jonas's before she realized she had moved. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I am not property. I am not theirs. This man, he does not own me either. But he sees me. And here, with him, is where I choose to stay." Gasps rippled. Nettie shrieked. Virgil spat. The lawmen straightened, their decision written on their faces. "Then it's settled. She's free to choose. We'll not enforce a claim against her will." Virgil lunged as though to strike, but Jonas moved quicker, his frame a wall. Their eyes locked, fury against calm. Jonas did not lift a fist, but his silence burned hotter than flame. Virgil faltered, his rage spilling into curses as he retreated to the wagon. Nettie's voice cracked with venom, but her words fell empty. The lawmen mounted, nodding to Jonas with respect. The wagon rolled away, wheels clattering like the last gasp of thunder. Dust settled in their wake, and the yard returned to stillness. Angelina trembled, her children pressed against her, but Jonas's hand remained around hers, anchoring. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eli, his voice rough with awe, whispered, "Mama, he kept us." Angelina knelt, drawing all her children close. Tears streamed, not of shame, but of release. She looked up at Jonas, her lips trembling with gratitude too deep for words. His eyes met hers, steady, softened, carrying a promise unspoken. That evening, the sky burned gold as the family gathered under the apple tree that stood near the cabin. Blossoms drifted on the breeze, petals scattering like blessings. Jonas stood beside Angelina, the children circling them, laughter returning in hesitant bursts. A preacher from town, summoned quietly days before, arrived with his worn Bible. And there, Beneath the boughs heavy with white bloom, Jonas and Angelina spoke vows, simple, steady, without flourish. The children tossed petals in the air, their joy loud and unrestrained. Ruth clapped her hands, Anna twirled in her faded dress, Sam hooped with boyish pride. Eli stood tall, shoulders squared, as though years of burden had lifted at once. Angelina's cheeks glowed, her ribbon fresh in her hair, her eyes shining as she slipped her hand into Jonas's. Jonas spoke little, as always, but when he said, "You are my home," it rang truer than 1,000 speeches. The valley held its breath as if listening. And then the world seemed to exhale, the breeze softening, the blossoms falling, the silence filled not with emptiness but with belonging. Night came gently. The family sat on the porch, the lantern casting a warm glow. Angelina's head rested lightly against Jonas's shoulder as the children dozed at their feet. The stars stretched endless above, vast and tender. Jonas gazed at the horizon, his arm around Angelina, his heart fuller than he had thought possible. The lonely cabin was no longer silent. The walls breathed with life, the air thick with love. The man who had once buried his heart with grief had found it again, not in grandeur, but in the laughter of children and the quiet strength of a woman once sold as less than human. Yet even in peace, Jonas knew the world beyond still whispered. Judgment did not die easily, nor did cruelty. He would face it again and again. But he was no longer alone. Neither was she. Together, they had chosen a life that defied shame. As the last light flickered from the lantern, Angelina lifted her gaze to Jonas. Her voice was low, filled with wonder. "Do you ever think, Jonas, that what we've begun here might outlast us?" He turned to her, his eyes deep in the shadows, his hand tightening around hers. And though he did not speak, the answer was there, steady as the earth beneath them, bright as the stars above.